I came back from the probate lawyer, my hands shaking and my heart racing, excited, eager to tell my daughter Laura and my son-in-law James that my late husband had left me 2 condos and a lake house, properties that were worth more than $800,000. After 50 years of marriage, after so much sacrifice, we finally had something solid, something that could change our lives. I went up the stairs of my building with a smile I couldn't contain, picturing their joyful faces, thinking about how this inheritance would bring us closer as a family again. But when I reached the door of my condo, I heard their voices. They were talking in the living room, and there was something in the tone that made me stop. I don't know why I didn't open the door right away. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was that sixth sense you develop after living 70 years in this world. I stayed there, frozen in the hallway, with the key in my hand, listening. What I heard next made my heart jump in a completely different way. James's voice sounded cold, calculating. He was saying that I was already old, that I was starting to forget things, that it would be easy to convince a doctor that I was no longer fit to handle my own affairs. My daughter, my own Laura, the girl I carried in my belly for 9 months, the one I raised with my own hands while working double shifts to give her everything she needed, responded with a brief, dry laugh. She said he was right, that it was best to act fast before I did something with the properties, before it occurred to me to sell them or donate them or do some crazy thing like an old sentimental fool. I leaned against the hallway wall because my legs gave out. The world spun around me. I felt nauseous. I felt as if someone had pulled the rug out from under my feet. They were talking about me as if I were a problem to be solved, as if my existence were an obstacle between them and the money, as if the years I dedicated to building a family, to loving, to sacrificing myself, meant absolutely nothing. James continued speaking. He mentioned something about a legal procedure, about getting me declared mentally incompetent to manage my assets. Laura asked how long that would take, and he replied that with the right contacts and a couple of manipulated medical evaluations, they could have total control in less than 6 months. Maybe less. 6 months. They talked about stripping me of my freedom, my dignity, of everything my husband and I built over decades, like discussing a dinner menu. I didn't scream. I didn't throw open the door to confront them. Something inside me, something I didn't know existed, turned cold and silent. I stood there, listening to every word, every detail of their miserable plan. I heard Laura say that I had always been too trusting, too naive, that it would be easy to manipulate me, that all they needed to do was show me a little fake affection for me to sign whatever they wanted. When they finished talking and I heard footsteps approaching the door, I hurried down the stairs as fast as I could. My knees protested, my back ached, but I didn't stop. I left the building and walked down the street aimlessly, with tears streaming down my wrinkled cheeks, the bitter taste of betrayal flooding my mouth. I walked for hours. I passed the park where I used to take Laura when she was little. I sat on a bench and watched the young mothers playing with their children, and I wondered at what point everything had gone wrong. At what point my daughter had stopped being that bright-eyed child who hugged me every night before bed, to become this woman capable of conspiring against her own mother. I remembered the difficult years after her father died 3 years ago, how I was left alone in that big condo, dealing with the grief, the loneliness, the weight of the memories. Laura barely visited me back then. She always had an excuse. She was always busy. And when she did come, it was brief, rushed, like performing an unpleasant obligation. But now, after the will was read, after knowing there were properties and money involved, she had suddenly started showing up more often. She called more. She asked about my health with a concern that I now understood was completely fake. Everything was part of their strategy. Everything was an act. As the sun began to set and the air grew colder, something shifted inside me. The sadness began to transform into something different, something harder, sharper. I wiped my tears and took a deep breath. If they thought I was a silly old woman, easy to fool, easy to manipulate, then that was exactly what I was going to show them. But inside, for the first time in a long time, I felt absolute clarity, a determination I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't going to confront them. I wasn't going to yell at them or beg them to reconsider. I wasn't going to give them the pleasure of seeing me destroyed. I was going to be smarter than that. Much smarter. I pulled out my cell phone, the one Laura always said I didn't know how to use well, and looked up a name in my contacts that I hadn't dialed in years. Eleanor Rhodes. My friend from youth, the one who had worked with me at City Hall for decades, the one who had always been cannier and more practical than me. If anyone could help me think clearly, it was her. I dialed the number with trembling fingers. She answered on the third ring. "Eleanor, I need your help," I said with a broken voice. Something terrible happened. Something I never imagined could happen. She didn't ask silly questions. She just told me to come straight to her house, that she'd make coffee, and we would talk calmly. I walked towards her condo, which was a few blocks from the park. With every step, I felt the broken woman who had left her building a few hours earlier, starting to make way for something new, something my children had never seen in me. Let me tell you how a mother who gave everything discovered that blood doesn't always guarantee loyalty, and how she decided that if they were going to play dirty, she could learn the rules of that game too. Because sometimes the worst betrayal comes from those you loved the most. And sometimes the only answer is the cold, calculated justice they would never expect from you. My name is Susan Miller. I am 70 years old, and until a few days ago, I thought I knew my life. I thought I understood my family. I thought that love and sacrifice would eventually receive their reward. How wrong I was. I was born in a small town where women learned from girlhood that our value was in serving, in keeping silent, in supporting others, even if we broke inside. I married Robert Young, a good man who worked in construction. We didn't have much, but we had dignity. We had modest, honest dreams. Laura was born when I was 25 years old. It was a difficult birth that nearly cost me my life, but when I held her in my arms, I knew I would do anything for her. I worked for years as a secretary at City Hall, a job I got after studying at night while caring for my baby during the day. Robert worked from dawn until night. We were a team. We were a family. We gave Laura everything we could. Private school tuition even if we had to eat beans and rice for weeks. New clothes when the other girls wore hand-me-downs. Piano lessons that we paid for with overtime. We wanted her to have opportunities we never had. We wanted her life to be easier, more comfortable, more full of possibilities. Maybe that was our mistake. Maybe we gave her so much that she never learned the value of sacrifice. She never understood what it meant to work until your bones ached. She never knew real hunger, true worry, the constant struggle. When Laura turned 23, she met James Matthews. He was an accountant at a mid-sized firm. He came from a family with a little more money than ours. From the beginning, I noticed something in his gaze. Something cold. Something calculating. But Laura was in love, and I kept my reservations to myself. A mother wants to see her daughter happy. A mother trusts that her daughter will choose well. They married in a ceremony that cost us 2 years of savings. Robert and I worked double shifts for months to pay for that white dress, those flowers, that elegant ballroom that James insisted was necessary to keep up appearances in front of his colleagues. We didn't mind. She was our only daughter. She deserved a beautiful wedding. The first few years seemed good. Laura worked as an administrator at a hospital. James was climbing the ladder at his firm. They visited us on Sundays, though less and less often. There was always an excuse, an important meeting, a social engagement, tired from work. Robert noticed it before I did. One night, while we were washing the dishes after one of those brief visits, he told me that something had changed in our daughter, that her smile no longer reached her eyes, that she talked about money and properties with a frequency that made him uncomfortable. I defended Laura. I told him that she was growing up, maturing, worrying about her future. Robert shook his head, but didn't insist. That was his way. He never fought with me. He always trusted my judgment about our daughter. 3 years ago, Robert suffered a massive heart attack while working on a construction site. He died before reaching the hospital. The world stopped for me that day. I lost my partner of 50 years. I lost the man who knew me better than anyone. I lost my anchor. Laura came to the funeral. She cried. She hugged my trembling body, but she left 2 days later, saying she had to return to work, that she couldn't take any more days off. She left me alone in that condo, full of memories and silence. The following months were the darkest of my life. There were days when I didn't want to get out of bed, days when I looked at old photos and cried until I ran out of tears. I called Laura, but she was always busy, always in a hurry, always something more important. It was Eleanor who saved me during that time. She was a widow too. She understood the weight of loneliness. She would come to visit me. She forced me to go out for walks. She reminded me that life went on even if I didn't want to continue with it. Little by little, I learned to live alone. I learned to cook for one person. I learned to sleep in an empty bed without waking up crying. I learned that the pain doesn't disappear. It just becomes more manageable over time. Robert had been prudent. He had a modest life insurance policy that left me some cash. But most importantly, he had purchased properties over the years. Small investments he made when the market was down. 2 condos that we rented out to supplement our income, and a lake house that we had bought 20 years ago, when we still dreamed of retiring together by the water. For 3 years, those properties were in legal limbo while the probate was being settled. The process was slow, bureaucratic, full of papers and procedures I didn't fully understand. But finally, a week ago, the lawyer called me to say that everything was ready, that the properties were officially in my name, that they were worth approximately $800,000 in the current market. $800,000. A fortune for someone like me, who had spent her life counting pennies. A fortune that Robert had quietly built, without boasting, thinking of our future together. I called Laura that same afternoon, excited. I told her I needed to see her, that I had important news. She said she would come the next day with James. I heard something in her voice, an urgency that hadn't been there in years. I should have noticed it then. I should have questioned why she suddenly had time for me. I couldn't sleep that night. I planned how I would tell them. I thought about suggesting that we live closer. Maybe Laura and James could move into one of the condos. Maybe we could spend the summers together at the lake house. Maybe, finally, we would be a united family again. How naive I was. How stupidly hopeful. The next day, I dressed carefully. I put on my grey dress, the one Laura had given me years ago. I combed my hair, applied light makeup. I wanted to look good. I wanted them to be proud of me. I left early to go to the bank to pick up the final probate documents. The lawyer handed them to me with a smile, congratulating me on the inheritance. I felt lucky. I felt grateful to Robert for having been so careful, so prudent. I walked back home slowly, enjoying the afternoon sun, imagining the joy on my daughter's face when I told her, imagining how this could change our relationship, bring us closer, give us back some of what we had lost. I went up the stairs with my heart pounding. I heard voices inside my condo. They had arrived early. Perfect. They were waiting for me. How considerate, I thought. How thoughtful. I took out the key, ready to open the door and surprise them with the news. But then I heard my name. Susan. They said it with a tone that made me stop, a tone I had never heard in my daughter's voice. And then I heard the rest. And my world was destroyed. And I understood finally who my daughter really was, and who I had been all this time, a fool who confused silence with peace and distance with respect. Eleanor opened the door for me and knew immediately that something terrible had happened. She didn't ask questions. She hugged me in the doorway while I trembled, unable to hold back the tears I had been saving during the whole walk to her house. She led me inside, sat me down on her old, comfortable sofa, and put water on to boil for coffee. When I could finally speak, I told her everything. Every word I had heard behind that door, every detail of the miserable plan my daughter and son-in-law had hatched. Eleanor listened in silence, her face hardening with every sentence, her hands gripping the coffee cup so tightly I thought she might break it. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then she spoke with a voice that allowed no argument. "Susan," she said, "I know this hurts you. I know you want to believe there's some explanation, some way to misunderstand what you heard. But we both know the truth. Your daughter and that man are planning to steal from you. They are planning to take away your freedom, your dignity, and everything Robert worked to leave you. And if you don't act now, they are going to succeed." She was right. I knew it. But admitting it out loud meant accepting a reality that broke my soul. It meant accepting that I had lost my daughter long before that day. Maybe I had lost her years ago, when she stopped seeing me as her mother and started seeing me as something she could use and discard. Eleanor got up and brought a notepad and a pen. "We're going to make a plan," she said firmly. "We're going to protect you. We're going to make sure they can't touch you or what is yours. But for that, you need to be strong. Susan, you need to stop being the mother who forgives everything and become the woman who defends what's hers." We spent hours talking that night. Eleanor had worked in the municipal administration for 30 years. She knew the laws, she knew the procedures, she knew exactly what people like Laura and James could do and how we could stop them. "The first thing you need," she explained, "is to document everything. Every conversation, every visit, every attempt at manipulation. You need concrete evidence of what they are doing. Without evidence, it's just your word against theirs, and a judge might believe them before you." "But how am I going to get evidence?" I asked, feeling lost. "I can't just record them. I wouldn't even know how to do it." Eleanor smiled for the first time that night, a smile that had something dangerous about it. "I know how to do it, and I know someone who can help us. My nephew Mark works in technology. He can install tiny, discreet cameras in your condo that they will never notice. You can also record conversations with your phone. It's completely legal if you are present in the conversation." The idea terrified and empowered me at the same time. I had never been a woman of deception, of hidden strategies. I had always believed in honesty, in speaking clearly, but they had broken those rules first. They had chosen betrayal and manipulation. I was just learning to defend myself on their own turf. "In addition," Eleanor continued, "you need to contact a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. Someone specializing in family law and probate. Someone who understands these cases and knows how to protect vulnerable people from abusive relatives. I know someone, she said after a moment of thought. Dr. Arthur Sterling. He worked with the city decades ago on cases of guardianship and elder protection. He's good, he's honest, and he won't be intimidated. I'm going to call him tomorrow morning and set up an appointment for you. I returned to my condo very late that night. The house was dark and silent. Laura and James had left, probably frustrated that I hadn't shown up after hearing their conversation. They were surely thinking I had gone shopping or to visit a friend. They would never imagine that I had heard everything. I sat in the kitchen without turning on the lights, looking out the window at the illuminated city. I thought of Robert. I thought about how he had worked so many years to make sure I was okay after he was gone. Those properties represented decades of effort, of sacrifice, of shared dreams. The two condos were in good neighborhoods. One was a small but well-located studio that we rented to a medical student for $700 a month. The other was larger, a two-bedroom in a building near downtown, which we rented to a young family for $1,200 a month. They were modest but constant incomes that had supplemented our pension for years. The lake house was different. It was our refuge, our dream. We had bought it when it was little more than a run-down cabin, and over 20 years, we fixed it up little by little. Robert would put in new flooring during the summers. I would paint the walls and plant flowers in the garden. It was the place where we planned to spend our golden years, watching the sunrise over the water, resting after a life of hard work. Now it was worth more than $300,000, according to the probate appraisal. The real estate market in the area had grown enormously in recent years. Wealthy families were buying waterfront properties for their vacations. In total, the three properties amounted to $800,000, a fortune that Robert had quietly built, without showing off, without ever boasting. A fortune that now my own daughter wanted to snatch from me by declaring me incompetent, perhaps locking me away in some nursing home while they enjoyed my dead husband's money. The phone rang, startling me. It was Laura. For a moment I considered not answering, but Eleanor had told me that I had to act normal, that I couldn't let them suspect that I knew anything. I answered, trying to make my voice sound natural. "Mom, where were you?" she asked, with a tone that was meant to sound worried, but which I could now recognize as fake. "We were waiting for you all afternoon. We got there early, as we agreed, but you weren't there." I lied softly. I had to run some errands that took longer than expected. Then I went to see Eleanor. "I'm sorry, honey, I should have called you." There was a pause. I heard James murmur something in the background. "It's okay, Mum," Laura finally said. "But you said you had something important to tell us. What is it?" My hand squeezed the phone. This was my chance. I could tell them the truth right now. I could confront them. But Eleanor's voice echoed in my mind. "You need evidence. You need to be smart." "Yes, I have news," I replied slowly, "but I prefer to tell you in person. It's something important about your father's inheritance. You can come for lunch on Sunday." Another silence. Then, with barely contained enthusiasm, Laura accepted. "Of course, Mum. We'll be there. Early." I hung up with trembling hands. I had just bought time. I had just set the first part of my trap. If they wanted to play games with me, I was going to give them exactly what they expected. A naive, trusting old woman. But while they thought they were manipulating me, I would be documenting every move, every word, every attempt to strip me of my dignity. The next day, Eleanor arrived with her nephew Mark. He was a young man in his 30s, quiet and efficient. He installed 3 tiny cameras in my condo, one in the living room hidden on a bookshelf, another in the kitchen disguised as a wall clock, and a third in the dining room inside a decorative vase. They were so small that I could barely see them myself. Mark showed me how the system worked. The cameras recorded directly to an application on my phone. I could review the recordings at any time, and everything was stored in a digital cloud that only I could access with a password. He patiently explained it, repeating the instructions until I was sure I understood. He also showed me how to discreetly activate the voice recorder on my phone. I just had to press the volume button 3 times, and it would start recording without anyone noticing. The screen would remain off. It would look like the phone was tucked away in my purse or pocket, but it would be capturing every word. When Mark left, I was alone, looking around my condo. Everything looked the same, but now there were hidden eyes watching. There were silent witnesses who would document the truth. I felt strange, as if I were betraying something fundamental about who I was. But then I remembered the words I had heard behind that door. I remembered how my own daughter had planned to strip me of my freedom, and the guilt vanished. On Thursday, I went to the appointment Eleanor had coordinated with Dr. Arthur Sterling. His office was downtown, in an old but well-maintained building. The waiting room was simple, with comfortable chairs and old magazines. There was no ostentation. I liked that. Dr. Sterling was a man about 55, with grey hair and intelligent eyes behind discreet glasses. He greeted me with genuine kindness, offering me coffee before we sat down to talk. There was something about his presence that inspired confidence. He didn't have that rush that many young lawyers have, that impatience to collect a fee and move on to the next client. Eleanor has told me something about your situation, he began in a calm voice. But I would like to hear it directly from you, Mrs. Miller. Tell me everything from the beginning. Take your time. There's no rush here. And so I did. I told him about Robert, about the inheritance, about the probate that had just been settled. I told him about Laura and James, how our relationship had cooled over the years. And then, with my voice breaking despite my efforts to maintain composure, I told him what I had heard behind my door. Dr. Sterling listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes in a notepad. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed deeply. Mrs. Miller, what you are describing is more common than people imagine. Every week I get similar cases. Children, grandchildren, nieces and nephews who see their elderly relatives as walking ATMs, as obstacles between them and an inheritance they feel already belongs to them. It is one of the cruelest forms of abuse because it comes wrapped in blood ties. He paused, choosing his words carefully. The strategy they plan to use against you is classic. They will look for compliant doctors who will diagnose dementia or mental incapacity based on superficial evaluations. They will present a case to a judge, arguing that you cannot care for yourself or manage your own assets. If they succeed, they would obtain legal guardianship over you. That means they would control your finances, your properties, even where you live, and what medical decisions are made on your behalf. A chill ran down my spine. Hearing it explained like that, with legal terms and specific procedures, made everything more real and more terrifying. But, I continued with a trembling voice, I am perfectly fine. I don't have dementia. I am not confused. How could they convince a judge of something that isn't true? Dr. Sterling leaned forward, his expression serious. Because the system isn't perfect, Mrs. Miller. A judge doesn't know you. They only see papers, medical evaluations, testimonies from relatives who swear they are worried about your well-being. If your daughter and son-in-law present a well-constructed case with a doctor backing their claims, there is a real possibility that they could achieve what they want. Especially because you are 70 years old and alone. Judges tend to be cautious with older people living without family supervision. The injustice of it hit me like a punch to the stomach. I had worked all my life. I had raised my daughter. I had been a responsible citizen, paying my taxes, fulfilling my obligations. And now, simply for being 70 years old, the system could decide that I was not capable of managing my own life. But there's good news, Dr. Sterling added with a small smile. You came to me before they acted. That gives us time to prepare a solid defense. And more than that, it gives us time to take proactive measures that will protect your rights and your assets. He took several documents from a drawer and spread them on the desk between us. The first thing we are going to do is get independent medical evaluations that certify your mental capacity. I have contacts with well-respected neurologists and psychiatrists who conduct thorough evaluations. These will serve as irrefutable evidence that you are in full possession of your faculties. I nodded, feeling a small relief. At least there were concrete steps we could take. Second, he continued, we are going to review and update your will. I want to ensure that your wishes are clearly documented and that it is impossible for anyone to question your will. We are also going to create a specific power of attorney that designates someone you trust to act on your behalf if you ever need it. Someone who is not your daughter. I immediately thought of Eleanor. She was the only person I fully trusted now. Third, and this is crucial, we are going to document everything that is happening. You tell me you have cameras installed. Perfect. I also want you to keep a detailed diary of every interaction with your daughter and son-in-law. Dates, times, what was said, who was present. Everything. If this goes to court, and there is a good possibility that it will, we need to have a meticulous record. I felt overwhelmed by all the information, but also strangely hopeful. For the first time since I had heard that terrible conversation, I felt like I was not completely defenseless. Dr. Sterling, I asked with a hesitant voice, how much is all of this going to cost? I don't have a lot of available cash right now. Most of my assets are in those properties. He waved his hand, dismissing my worry. Eleanor and I are old friends. She has helped me many times over the years with complicated municipal procedures. Consider this a favor between friends. We will charge reasonable fees, and you can pay me when you sell a property or when you have the funds available. For now, the important thing is to protect you. I felt tears welling up at so much unexpected kindness. In the midst of the betrayal by my own blood, I had found allies in people who owed me nothing. We spent the next hour going over details. Dr. Sterling explained that he would also investigate James Matthews. He wanted to know if he had debts, financial problems, anything that would explain his sudden urgency to get my money. The information could be useful if we eventually had to face them in court. When I left his office that afternoon, I felt different, stronger, more prepared. The pain was still there, deep and constant, like a wound that wouldn't heal. But now it was accompanied by something else. Determination, purpose. I walked through the downtown streets watching people pass, young mothers with their children, elderly couples holding hands, families who seemed happy and united. I wondered how many of those smiles hid dark secrets, how many of those seemingly perfect families concealed betrayals and manipulations behind closed doors. That night, alone in my condo, I took out a new notepad I had bought on the way home. On the first page, I wrote the date and began my diary. I documented everything that had happened since the day of the probate. Every detail, every conversation, every emotion. Dr. Sterling was right. If this went to trial, I needed proof. I needed to show the world who my daughter really was. On Friday, I received a call from Laura. Her voice sounded sweet, worried, completely fake now that I knew the truth. Mum, how are you? I've been thinking about you a lot. I know you've been alone since Dad died. It must be hard managing everything alone at your age. At your age, those words again, laden with barely disguised condescension. I'm fine, honey, I replied with the softest voice I could fake. It's true that I sometimes feel a little tired, but nothing out of the ordinary for someone my age. I heard satisfaction in her silence. She was happy that I accepted that narrative of fragility, of tiredness, of an old age that needed help. It was exactly what she wanted to hear. That's why we wanted to talk to you the other day, Mum. James and I have been talking, and we think maybe you need more support. Someone to help you with day-to-day things, with the papers, with important decisions. We don't want you to stress too much. Every word was another brick in the prison they planned to build around me. But I kept playing along, discreetly activating the recorder on my phone just as Mark had taught me. It's very considerate of you to worry like that, I said in a grateful tone. The truth is that there are things that confuse me lately. All those probate papers, the legal terms. Sometimes it's hard for me to understand everything. It was a lie, of course. I understood every document perfectly. But I needed her to believe that I was vulnerable, that I was easy to manipulate. I needed her to let her guard down. Exactly, Mom, Laura replied with barely contained enthusiasm. That's why we thought it would be a good idea for you to give us a power of attorney to help you with those things. That way you won't have to worry about anything. We would take care of everything. You would just have to rest and enjoy. A power of attorney. They wanted me to sign a legal document that would give them control over my finances and properties. Dr. Sterling had warned me this was coming. It was the first step in their strategy. Well, I don't know, I responded with a hesitant voice. It sounds like something important. I would have to think about it. Of course, Mum. There's no rush. We can talk about it on Sunday when we come for lunch. James knows a very good lawyer who could help us with the papers. It would just be a matter of signing, and you would be more relaxed. A lawyer they knew. A lawyer who would work for them, not for me. The trap was perfectly designed. If I had truly been the confused old woman they thought I was, I probably would have fallen for it already. Okay, honey. We'll talk on Sunday then, I said with feigned tiredness in my voice. I'm going to rest now. I feel a little fatigued. Rest, Mum. We love you very much. I love you very much. Those words that once filled my heart now sounded hollow and empty, lies wrapped in sweetness, poison served with a smile. I hung up and saved the recording with the date and time. It was clear evidence of their intention to manipulate me into obtaining a power of attorney. Dr. Sterling would be satisfied. On Saturday morning, I went to my first medical evaluation. Dr. Theodore Maxwell was a neurologist with more than 30 years of experience. His office was full of diplomas and certifications. He gave me a battery of exhaustive tests that lasted more than 3 hours. Tests of memory, logical reasoning, spatial and temporal orientation. I answered detailed questionnaires about my daily life, my habits, my ability to manage finances and make decisions. In the end, he looked at me over his glasses with a reassuring smile. Mrs. Miller, you are in perfect mental condition. Your memory is excellent for your age. Your reasoning ability is sharp. There is no indication of dementia, cognitive decline, or any other condition that could affect your ability to make decisions about your own life and your own assets. I am going to prepare a detailed report documenting everything. I felt enormous relief. Having that official certification was like having a shield against the lies my daughter planned to spread about me. In the afternoon, I went to see Eleanor. She had been investigating on her own, using her old contacts at City Hall and in other government offices. What she had discovered chilled my blood. "Susan," she said with a grave expression as we sat down with coffee, "James Matthews has serious financial problems. He owes more than $150,000 in credit cards and personal loans. Furthermore, the company he works for is undergoing restructuring. There are rumors of massive layoffs in the coming months." Then everything made sense. The urgency, the conspiracy, the elaborate plan. It wasn't simple greed. It was desperation. James was drowning in debt and saw my properties as his life raft. "And there's more," Eleanor continued in a somber voice. "Laura left her job at the hospital 6 months ago. She told her colleagues she resigned to take better care of you. But from what you tell me, she barely visits. I think she was laid off and is using that excuse to save face. My daughter was not only deceitful, she was also a liar. She had been using me as an alibi to hide that she had lost her job. That was probably why they needed my money so desperately. Without her income, and with James's debts mounting, they must have been on the verge of financial ruin. A part of me, the part that was still a mother, felt a flicker of concern. My daughter was in trouble. She was struggling. But then I remembered that instead of coming to me honestly, instead of asking me for help as family, she had chosen to destroy me. She had chosen to steal my freedom and my dignity. And any compassion I might have felt evaporated. Sunday arrived too quickly. I woke up early with a knot in my stomach. Today would be the day. Today I would play the role of my life. The naive, trusting old woman they expected to see. I dressed carefully, choosing comfortable but slightly unkempt clothes. I left my hair less styled than usual. I wanted to look a little more fragile, a little more vulnerable than I really was. I prepared lunch following the recipes that Laura loved as a child. Pot roast with mashed potatoes, fresh salad, homemade rolls. The smells filled the condo with memories of happier times. Before they arrived, I checked the cameras. All of them worked perfectly. Every angle of my living room and dining room was covered. Everything they said and did would be recorded. They arrived exactly at 12 minutes past midnight. Laura brought flowers, a cheap bouquet probably bought at the gas station on the way. James carried a bottle of wine. Both smiled those fake smiles that I could now recognize so clearly. "Mom, it smells so good," Laura exclaimed, kissing my cheek. "You look well. Did you rest?" "Yes, honey. I've been sleeping better lately." I lied with a sweet smile. Come in, come in. Lunch is almost ready." We sat at the table and talked about trivialities while we ate. The weather, the news, neighbours I barely knew. Laura and James were impatient. I noticed it in how they looked at each other, in how James drummed his fingers on the table, in how Laura barely touched her food. Finally, while I was getting dessert, Laura brought up the topic. "Mum, you said the other day that you had news about Dad's inheritance, that everything was settled now." "Yes," I replied, letting my voice tremble slightly. "The probate finally finished. It turns out your father left me more than I thought." I saw their eyes light up, how they leaned forward with barely disguised interest. "That's wonderful, Mum. How much is it?" I left a dramatic pause, pretending that it was difficult for me to recall the exact numbers. "It's 3 properties, the 2 condos we already knew about, and the lake house. The lawyer says they are worth about $800,000 in total." The silence that followed was electric. I could see the calculations running through their minds. $800,000 divided by 2, $400,000 for each of them. Enough to pay off all of James's debts and live comfortably for years. "That's amazing, Mum," Laura finally said, her voice choked with emotion. "Dad was so thoughtful, always thinking about your well-being." Yes, your father was a good man, I said with a shaky voice, allowing real tears to roll down my cheeks. He always worried about me. He always wanted me to be safe. James cleared his throat. It was the first time he had spoken since I mentioned the amount. Mrs. Susan, that's a lot of money, a lot of responsibility to manage alone. Have you thought about what you are going to do with those properties? He said it like a question, but it sounded like a thinly veiled accusation, as if I were incapable of making sensible decisions about my own assets. Well, I replied with an insecure voice, letting my hands shake while I held the coffee cup. I'm not really sure. It's all so complicated. The taxes, the maintenance, the tenants. Sometimes I feel overwhelmed with all the paperwork. I saw the shine of satisfaction in Laura's eyes. It was exactly what they wanted to hear. The seed of doubt. The confession of weakness. That's why we wanted to talk to you, Mum, Laura said, taking my hand across the table with fake tenderness. James and I have been very worried. Seeing you like this, alone, dealing with all of this, isn't fair to you. Not at your age. There was that phrase again. At your age. As if being 70 years old automatically turned me into a mental invalid. We've thought of a solution, Laura continued, exchanging a knowing glance with James. How about we help you manage all of this? We could take care of the papers, talking to the tenants, paying the taxes. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing. James nodded with feigned enthusiasm. Exactly. I work with numbers every day. I know investments, taxes, property management. I could make sure everything is in order and that you receive your income without any stress. It sounded like a reasonable thing if you didn't know the truth, like worried children offering genuine help to an elderly mother. But I knew what it really meant. They wanted control. They wanted access. They wanted my signature on documents that would give them power over everything Robert had built. I let the silence linger. I looked at them with a confused expression, as if I were processing an idea too complex for my supposedly fragile mind. I don't know, I finally said in a small voice. It sounds like a lot of work for you. I don't want to be a burden. You are not a burden, Mum, Laura insisted, squeezing my hand tighter. You are our family. It is our duty to take care of you. We want your last years to be peaceful and happy. My last years, as if I already had one foot in the grave, as if it were a matter of months before they could completely dispose of me and keep everything. James took some papers out of his briefcase. He spread them on the table with careful, deliberate movements. Look, Mrs. Susan, I brought you some documents that a lawyer friend of mine prepared. They are very simple. They would basically give us authorization to help you with your financial matters. Nothing complicated. You would just sign here and here, and we could start organizing everything for you. I took the papers with deliberately trembling hands and looked at them, squinting, as if it were difficult for me to read the small print. In reality, I read every word with absolute clarity. It was exactly what Dr. Sterling had predicted, a general power of attorney that would give them total control over my bank accounts, my properties, my financial decisions. Once signed, I would effectively be defenseless. It's a lot of information, I said with a confused voice. All these legal terms. I'm not sure I understand what I'm signing. It's only to help you, Mum, Laura repeated with exaggerated patience, as if speaking to a small child. You trust us, right? The question hung in the air, like a trap waiting to close. Of course I trusted them. That's what I was supposed to say. They were my family, my blood. Yes, of course I trust you, I whispered, letting my voice crack. You are all I have now that your father is gone. I saw triumph shine in their eyes. They thought they had won. They thought it was as simple as putting a pen in my hand and guiding it toward the signature line. But then, with perfect acting, I let go of the coffee cup I was holding in my other hand. It crashed to the floor with a loud noise, spilling the dark liquid onto the tiles. I jumped, startled, placing my hand on my chest. "Oh my God!" I exclaimed with a breathless voice. "Look what I did. How clumsy of me. I don't know what happened." Laura quickly got up to help me clean, but I could see the satisfaction on her face. To her, this was more evidence of my supposed decrepitude. An elderly woman dropping things, easily startled, who clearly needed supervision. "It's okay, Mum. Don't worry, Joe," she said as she picked up the ceramic pieces. "These things happen. Are you feeling okay? You didn't hurt yourself?" No, I'm fine," I replied, my hands trembling theatrically. "Just a little nervous with all of this. It's a lot to process all at once." James gathered the papers from the table, moving them away from the spilled coffee. "Maybe it's too much for one day," he suggested in a compassionate voice. "Why don't you take some time to think about it, Mrs. Susan? We can come back in a few days, when you're more rested and calm." He was smart. He realized that pushing too hard could make me suspicious, could make me backtrack. Better to let me think I had time, that I had options, while they planned their next move. "Yes, I think I need to rest," I admitted in a tired voice. "This whole conversation has left me exhausted. I can hold on to the papers and read them calmly." I saw doubt cross James's face. He didn't want to leave the unsigned documents with me. But Laura put a hand on his arm. "Sure, Mom. Keep the papers. Read them in peace. And any questions you have, call us and we'll explain." There was no rush. There was a rush, of course. Their debts wouldn't wait. Their financial problems wouldn't disappear on their own. But they had to maintain the appearance of patience, of genuine concern. They left half an hour later, not without making sure multiple times that I was okay, that I didn't feel unwell, that I would call if I needed anything. Their voices dripped with fake sweetness, like poisoned honey. When the door closed behind them, I stood motionless for several minutes. Then slowly, I reviewed the camera recordings. Everything had been captured, their expressions when I mentioned the amount of money, the calculating way they presented the documents. Every word, every gesture, every knowing look between them. It was perfect evidence. I immediately called Dr. Sterling on my cell phone. He answered on the second ring. "How did it go, Mrs. Miller?" he asked without preamble. "Exactly as you predicted," I replied, feeling a strange calm. "They tried to get me to sign a general power of attorney. I have everything recorded." "Excellent. Bring me the recordings tomorrow, and the documents they left you. I want to see exactly what they planned to have you sign." That night, alone in my silent condo, I took out my diary and documented every detail of the lunch. The exact words they used, the expressions on their faces, the moment I intentionally dropped the cup to appear more fragile than I was. As I wrote, I thought of all the mothers who had gone through this before me, women who had given everything for their children, only to be betrayed in the end. Women who had signed those papers because they trusted, because they loved, because they couldn't imagine that their own blood would harm them. But I was not going to be one of them. I had learned to play their game, and I was playing it better than they would ever imagine. The next day, Laura called early. Her voice sounded worried, but I detected the real anxiety underneath. The anxiety of someone who desperately needed their plan to work. "Mum, how did you sleep? Were you thinking about what we talked about yesterday?" "Yes, honey," I replied in a tired voice. "I was looking at the papers, but I still don't fully understand some parts. There are so many complicated words. We can come over today and explain everything calmly, she quickly offered. Or, if you prefer, we can take you to our lawyer so he can explain it directly. No, I don't want to bother, I replied with a hesitant voice. Maybe I should consult with my own lawyer first, just to make sure I understand correctly. There was a tense silence on the other end of the line. It was the first time I had mentioned having my own lawyer, the first crack in the facade of the helpless old woman they expected to manipulate. Your own lawyer, Laura repeated with a carefully controlled voice. I didn't know you had one, Mum. Well, Dr. Sterling helped me with some of the probate paperwork, I explained, maintaining my innocent tone. I liked him. I thought maybe he could explain these papers to me too. Another silence. I could imagine Laura and James exchanging panicked glances in their condo. An independent lawyer would completely ruin their plans. Mom, I don't think it's necessary to spend money on lawyers, Laura said, trying to sound reasonable. We are your family. We just want to help you. Why are you distrusting us? The question was designed to provoke guilt, to make me feel bad for questioning them. But I was beyond those emotional manipulations now. I'm not distrusting you, honey, I replied with a soft voice. I just want to understand clearly before I sign something so important. Your father always said one should read carefully before signing any document. He was very careful about those things. Using Robert's memory was a low blow, but effective. Laura couldn't argue against her own father's advice without sounding disrespectful. Okay, Mom, she finally said with a tense voice. Do what you think is best. We just want you to be at peace. I hung up feeling a small victory. I had made them nervous. I had made them doubt. Now they would have to accelerate their plans or risk me discovering the truth with the help of a real lawyer. 3 days later, I received a call from an unknown number. A masculine voice identified himself as Dr. Andrew Ross, a psychiatrist. My confusion must have been evident because he continued quickly. Your daughter Laura contacted me, he explained with a professional but cold voice. She is very concerned about your mental health. She says she has recently noticed changes in your behavior. Frequent forgetfulness, confusion, difficulty making decisions. I would like to schedule an evaluation to rule out any cognitive problems. There was the next step in their plan. A compliant psychiatrist who would diagnose what they needed diagnosed. Dr. Sterling had warned me this might happen. Dr. Ross, I replied with a firm voice. I don't have any cognitive problems. I have already been evaluated by Dr. Theodore Maxwell, a certified neurologist, and the results were perfect. I do not need another evaluation. There was a surprised pause. Clearly, he didn't expect that response. I understand, he said with less certainty. But your daughter is very worried. Perhaps a second opinion could reassure her. My daughter can obtain a copy of Dr. Maxwell's report if she is so worried, I replied with a harshness that surprised even myself. I will not submit to unnecessary evaluations just to calm unfounded anxieties. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, but this time it wasn't from fear, but from rage. They had tried to bring in a doctor to declare me incompetent. They had taken the next step in their conspiracy. But I was prepared. I immediately called Dr. Sterling and told him about the call. He listened with grave attention. This is good for us, he finally said. They are showing their hand too soon. They are desperate. That makes them careless. I am going to contact this Dr. Ross and make it very clear to him that any evaluation without your informed consent would be completely illegal, and he could lose his license. That night, Laura showed up at my condo without warning. She rang the doorbell repeatedly until I opened it. Her face was red with barely contained frustration. Mum, Why were you so rude to the doctor who called you? She demanded, walking in without waiting for an invitation. He only wanted to help you. I didn't ask for his help, I replied, closing the door behind her. I already have my own doctors. I don't need you to get me doctors without asking me first. I'm worried about you, she yelled, losing the careful control she had maintained until now. You've been acting strange, distrusting us, refusing to accept help. It's not normal, Mum. What's not normal, I replied with a dangerously calm voice, is for my own daughter to try to manipulate me into signing documents that would give her total control over my life. The silence that followed was absolute. Laura's face went from furious red to pale white. Her eyes widened with shock and something close to fear. What are you talking about? She whispered. Do you think I'm stupid, Laura? Do you think I can't read? Those papers James brought weren't simple authorizations to help me. They were a general power of attorney, complete control over my finances, my properties, my decisions. You wanted to turn me into a prisoner in my own life. She tried to regain her composure, but it was too late. I had already seen the panic in her eyes. That's not true. We only wanted to help you. You are misinterpreting everything. I'm not misinterpreting anything, I continued with a voice that was getting louder. I heard you, Laura. That first day when I came back from the probate, I was behind the door. I heard you and James planning how to declare me incompetent, how to steal everything your father left me. The colour completely drained from her face. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. I had trapped her. I had confronted her with the truth she didn't know I knew. That's a lie, she finally said in a weak voice. You're confused. You're making things up. I'm not confused, I replied, pulling out my phone. And I'm not making anything up. I have recordings. I have proof. I have every word you said, every plan you made, everything documented. Her expression changed from denial to fury in an instant. You recorded us, she cried in a hysterical voice. You spied on your own family. What kind of mother does that? What kind of daughter conspires to rob her own mother? I replied with an icy voice. What kind of person plans to destroy the freedom of the one who gave her life? Laura began to cry. Fake tears that I had seen many times before when she was a child and wanted to get her way. Mum, please. You're misunderstanding everything. We were just worried. James is under a lot of pressure at work. We have debts. We thought if we could help you with the properties, maybe we could also solve our problems. It wasn't with bad intentions. She said that, while planning to declare me mentally incompetent and possibly lock me in a nursing home to take control of my money. Get out, I said in a voice that allowed no argument. Leave my house right now. Mum, you can't be serious. I'm your daughter. You are a stranger who shares my blood, I replied, opening the door. A daughter wouldn't do what you planned to do to me. Now leave before I call the police. She stood frozen, looking at me as if it were the first time she had truly seen me. Then, with a dramatic sob, she ran out of the condo. I closed the door and leaned against it, trembling. Not from fear or sadness, but from something more powerful. Liberation. I had confronted my treacherous daughter. I had set boundaries. I had defended my dignity. The next day, Dr. Sterling called me with news. Mrs. Miller, I have important information. Laura and James filed a petition with the family court, requesting a mental competency evaluation for you. They allege you are showing signs of dementia and paranoia. They want a hearing to determine if you need legal guardianship. So they had declared open war. They were no longer trying to manipulate me privately. Now they sought to use the legal system to destroy me. When is the hearing? I asked with a calm voice that surprised even myself. In 2 weeks, but don't worry. We have everything we need to defend ourselves. Your evaluation with Dr. Maxwell, the recordings of their conversations, the report on James's debts, the evidence that Laura lost her job and lied about it. We are going to prove exactly who they are and what they were planning. Those 2 weeks were the most difficult of my life. Laura launched a smear campaign against me. She called neighbors, old friends, anyone who knew me, telling them that I was losing my mind, that I had become paranoid and aggressive, that I was rejecting help and acting erratically. Some believed her. They stopped returning my calls. They looked at me with pity when they saw me on the street. But others, the ones who really knew me, came to visit me. They talked to me. They saw with their own eyes that I was perfectly fine, and several offered to testify at the hearing. Eleanor was my rock during that time. She came every day. She helped me prepare emotionally for what was coming. She reminded me that the truth was on my side. The morning of the hearing dawned cold and grey. I dressed carefully, choosing a sober but elegant suit. I wanted to look dignified, competent, completely in control of my faculties. Eleanor came to pick me up early. She took my hand as we walked towards the car. "You're going to be fine," she told me firmly. "The truth always wins, Susan. Always." I wanted to believe her, but the fear was still there, cold and heavy in my stomach. What if the judge didn't believe me? What if Laura's lies were more convincing than my truth? What if I ended up exactly where they wanted, stripped of my freedom, locked up somewhere while they enjoyed Robert's money? The courthouse was an imposing grey stone building. The hallways smelled of old paper and broken expectations. Dr. Sterling was waiting for us at the entrance with his briefcase full of documents and evidence. He greeted me with a reassuring smile. "Remember, Mrs. Miller," he said as we walked up the stairs. "You have done nothing wrong. You are the victim here. Just answer the questions honestly and calmly. I'll take care of the rest." The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined. There were rows of wooden benches, a tall dais where the judge would sit, and tables for the lawyers. Laura and James were already there, seated with their lawyer. When I walked in, Laura looked at me with an expression that tried to be maternal concern, but did not hide the calculating gleam in her eyes. James didn't look at me at all. He kept his gaze fixed on the papers in front of him, his jaw clenched and his hands clasped so tightly that his knuckles were white. I sat next to Dr. Sterling at our table. Eleanor sat on the benches behind us, along with 3 other neighbours who had come to testify on my behalf. Their presence gave me strength. The judge entered. She was a woman in her 60s, with grey hair pulled back in a strict bun and intelligent eyes behind frameless glasses. She sat down with precise movements and looked at all of us with a neutral expression. "We are here," she began with a clear, authoritative voice, "to evaluate a petition filed by Mrs. Laura Miller Matthews and Mr. James Matthews, requesting a determination of Mrs. Susan Miller's mental competency and considering the establishment of a legal guardianship. We will proceed with testimonies and evidence from both parties." Laura's lawyer spoke first. He was a young man in an expensive suit with a practiced smile. He presented his case with carefully chosen words. He spoke of an elderly mother living alone, showing signs of cognitive decline, rejecting family help, and acting with unjustified paranoia. He painted a portrait of a woman who needed protection from herself. He called Laura to the stand. She walked with slow steps, a tissue in her hand, and her eyes red as if she had been crying. Her performance was impeccable. Under oath, she began to tell her version of the events. She described how I had changed in recent months, how I forgot conversations, repeated questions, got confused about dates and places. She spoke of her growing concern, her attempts to help me, my aggressive rejection of her support. My mother accused my husband and me of conspiring against her, she said with a broken voice. She says we recorded her, that we planned to rob her. But none of that is true, Your Honour. We only wanted to help her. These unfounded accusations, this paranoia, are exactly why we are here. Because my mother is not well and she needs help, even if she can't see it. It was brilliant. She had taken my truth and twisted it to make it look like the product of a sick mind. If I hadn't had proof, if it was just my word against hers, she probably would have won. The lawyer tried to present Dr. Ross as an expert witness, but Dr. Sterling immediately objected. Your Honour, that doctor never evaluated my client. Any opinion he offers would be purely speculative and based on information from third parties with clear personal interests in the outcome of this case. The judge nodded. Objection sustained. Dr. Ross, your testimony will not be considered. I saw the first crack in the confidence of Laura's lawyer, but he continued, calling some neighbours who had supposedly seen me act strangely. Their testimonies were vague, full of maybes, and it seemed to me nothing concrete, nothing that really demonstrated mental incompetence. Finally, it was Dr. Sterling's turn. He stood up calmly and began methodically to dismantle every argument of the opposing party. Your Honour, he said in a clear voice, what we have here is not a case of cognitive decline, but of elder financial abuse. Allow me to present the evidence. He began with Dr. Maxwell's report. He read the conclusions aloud. Perfect cognitive abilities, excellent memory, intact logical reasoning, completely competent to make decisions about her own life. Mrs. Miller shows no signs of dementia or mental deterioration, Dr. Sterling continued. She was thoroughly evaluated by one of the most respected neurologists in the city just 3 weeks ago. The results are irrefutable. Then he presented the investigation into James, the $150,000 of debt, the problems at his company, the desperate financial pressure motivating him. Mr. Matthews has a clear incentive to gain control over my client's assets, he explained. It is not family concern that motivates him. It is economic necessity. He presented evidence that Laura had lost her job 6 months ago and had lied about the reasons, supposedly using her mother's care as an excuse when in reality she barely visited. And now, Your Honour, I will present the most compelling evidence. He took out his laptop and connected it to the courtroom screen. The recording of that first conversation began to play. Laura and James's voices filled the room, clear and unmistakable. She's already old. She's starting to forget things. It will be easy to convince a doctor that she's no longer fit to handle her own affairs. You're right. It's best to act fast before she does something with the properties. The silence in the room was absolute. I watched the colour drain from Laura's face, how James closed his eyes, as if he could block the reality of his own words being played in front of a judge. The recording continued. Every incriminating word, every detail of their plan, every derogatory reference to me. When it finished, the judge looked at me with an expression that mixed compassion for me and disgust toward my accusers. Dr. Sterling then presented the recordings from the Sunday lunch, the way they tried to manipulate me into signing documents, how they took advantage of every moment of apparent confusion on my part, how they spoke to each other with knowing glances when they thought I didn't understand what was happening. Finally, he called me to testify. I walked to the stand with trembling legs, but my head held high. I put my hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Dr. Sterling asked me simple questions: my name, my age, my address, my daily activities. I answered each one with clarity, Then he asked me to explain in my own words what had happened. And I did. I told him how I had returned from the probate happy, eager to share the news with my family, how I had heard their conspiracy behind the door, the shock, the pain, the betrayal I felt. I told him how I had to act to protect myself, to document everything because my own daughter was trying to rob me of my freedom and my dignity. My voice broke at times, but I never lost my train of thought. I never got confused. Every date, every detail, every emotion expressed with perfect coherence. When I finished, the judge asked me some direct questions about my finances, my properties, my future plans. I answered each one without hesitation. "Mrs. Miller," she finally asked, "why do you think your daughter did this?" I took a moment before answering. I looked at Laura, who was now crying openly, her head in her hands. "I believe my daughter and son-in-law are financially desperate," I replied with a calm voice. "I believe they saw my inheritance as the solution to their problems, and I believe that somewhere along the way, they stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a resource, as something they could use and discard." There was a long silence. Then the judge motioned for me to return to my seat. Laura's lawyer attempted to cross-examine me, looking for inconsistencies in my testimony, trying to make me appear confused or paranoid. But I was prepared. Every answer was clear, direct, coherent. Finally, after hours of testimony and evidence, the judge called a 30-minute recess to deliberate. We left the courtroom and waited in the hallway. Eleanor hugged me, while I trembled with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. When we were called back, the judge had her decision ready. After reviewing all the evidence presented, the judge began in a firm voice. "I find that the petition for guardianship is completely without merit. Mrs. Susan Miller has demonstrated that she is in full possession of her mental faculties. The medical evaluations confirm that there is no cognitive decline. Her testimony was clear, coherent, and completely credible." She paused, looking directly at Laura and James with a severe expression. "More concerning still is the evidence of manipulation and elder financial abuse presented by the defense. The recordings reveal a deliberate conspiracy to strip Mrs. Miller of her autonomy and her assets through false allegations of mental incapacity. This constitutes not only a violation of family trust, but potentially a crime." I watched James swallow hard, how Laura shrank in her seat. "Therefore," the judge continued, "I completely reject the petition for guardianship. Mrs. Susan Miller will maintain total control over her person and her assets. Furthermore, I order that the petitioners cover all legal costs of this procedure, including the fees of Mrs. Miller's attorney." She banged the gavel against the dais with a sound that resonated like thunder. "Moreover, I am referring this case to the District Attorney's Office to investigate possible charges of fraud, attempted elder financial abuse, and conspiracy. This type of behavior is unacceptable and must have consequences." I felt as if the entire weight of the world had been lifted from my shoulders. I had won. The truth had prevailed. My freedom was protected. Laura sobbed audibly. Her lawyer tried to plead for clemency, to argue that it had been a misunderstanding, but the judge raised a hand, stopping him. "There is no possible misunderstanding when there is aggravated evidence of conspiracy," she said harshly. "These people attempted to destroy the life of their own mother for money. That is not a mistake. It is a choice, and choices have consequences." When we left the courthouse, the sun had finally broken through the grey clouds. Eleanor hugged me while I cried, this time tears of liberation, of justice served, of dignity recovered. Dr. Sterling shook my hand with genuine warmth. "You did the right thing, Mrs. Miller. You stood up for yourself. You protected yourself. You should be proud. And I was. For the first time in months, I felt pride instead of shame or pain. The following weeks were strange. Laura and James faced criminal charges for attempted elder fraud. Their case became public, appearing in local newspapers as a warning about family financial abuse. The social humiliation was immense. Friends abandoned them. James lost his job when his company learned of the scandal. Laura called me once, crying, begging for forgiveness. She said James had pressured her, that she had been desperate, that she never really would have let them hurt me. But I knew the truth. I had heard her voice on those recordings. I had seen the coldness in her eyes when they planned to strip me of everything. The repentance she showed now was not for betraying me, but for being caught. I did not answer her. I did not forgive her. Some betrayals are too deep to heal. Some wounds should not be covered with bandages of false forgiveness, because that only allows the infection to spread. I made important decisions about my future. I sold one of the condos for $300,000. With that money, I paid the full fees of Dr. Pierre Sterling, who had been so generous initially and donated a significant amount to a shelter for elderly women victims of family abuse. I wanted my experience to help others who perhaps didn't have the luck or the resources to defend themselves as I did. The other condo and the lake house I put into a trust. Eleanor was designated as co-administrator with me. The rental income would allow me to live comfortably for the rest of my days without depending on anyone. I also updated my will. Laura did not appear in it. Instead, I left everything to charitable organizations that helped the elderly, and a portion to Eleanor as a thank you for her loyalty when I needed it most. Some told me I was too harsh, that Laura was my daughter, my only family, that I should give her another chance. But those people hadn't heard what I heard. They hadn't felt what I felt when my own blood conspired to lock me up, to declare me crazy, to steal everything while I was still breathing. Forgiveness is not mandatory. Love does not justify abuse. And shared blood does not grant the right to destroy someone without consequences. 6 months after the hearing, I sat on the porch of the lake house watching the sunset paint the water gold and orange. It was a moment that Robert and I had dreamed of sharing together. Although he was not physically with me, I felt his presence in the gentle breeze, in the peace of the place we had built with so much love. Eleanor came to visit me that weekend. We drank coffee on the porch as the birds sang in the nearby trees. "How do you feel?" she asked me with that direct way I had always appreciated in her. "Free," I replied after thinking for a moment. "Sad, but free. Hurt, but at peace." And it was true. The pain of losing my daughter to betrayal hadn't disappeared. It probably never would completely disappear. But it no longer consumed me. It no longer defined me. I had learned that you can love someone all your life and still need to protect yourself from them. That family is not just shared blood, but respect, loyalty, and genuine love. That sometimes the greatest strength is in saying no, in setting boundaries, in defending your dignity, even if it means being alone. I thought of all the women who had gone through similar experiences. Mothers betrayed by greedy children, grandmothers stripped of their rights by manipulative families, elderly women declared incompetent by people who only saw their money, not their humanity. To all of them I wanted to say, you are not alone, you are not crazy, and you do not deserve to be treated as disposable objects just because you are advanced in years. Age does not make you less human. It does not take away your right to make your own decisions, to control your own life, to be treated with respect and dignity. And when someone tries to take those rights away from you, no matter who they are, You have the right and the obligation to defend yourself. I received a letter from Laura a month ago. I did not open it. I put it in a drawer along with the other two she had sent before. Maybe someday I will have the emotional strength to read them. Maybe I never will. And both options are okay. I do not owe my continuous suffering to anyone. I should not sacrifice my peace of mind on the altar of forced forgiveness. I have given enough in my life. I have sacrificed enough. Now, in these years that remain for me, I choose to give myself what I always gave others: understanding, patience, and unconditional love. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I had signed those papers, if I had blindly trusted like the naive old woman they expected me to be. I would probably be in some nursing home now, declared incompetent, occasionally visited by a daughter who would fake concern while spending my late husband's money. But I was not that woman. When faced with betrayal, I did not collapse. I became stronger. I learned to fight. I learned that self-love is not selfishness, but survival. Robert would be proud, I think. He always saw me as stronger than I saw myself. He always believed that I could face anything. And in the end, he was right. As the sun finished setting over the lake, I felt a profound calm. It wasn't exactly happiness. It was something more complex. It was acceptance. It was peace won through battle. It was the serenity that comes from knowing that you defended yourself when others tried to destroy you. Tomorrow I will wake up in this house that I love, in this place that Robert and I created with our own hands and dreams. I will drink coffee, watching the sunrise over the water. I will call Eleanor to plan our next visit. Maybe I will go to town to buy new plants for the garden. I will live my life on my own terms, making my own decisions, answering only to myself. And that, after everything I went through, is the greatest possible triumph. To all the women who are going through something similar, I say this: trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't let anyone convince you that you are crazy or confused when you know the truth. Seek help. Document everything. Defend your right to live with dignity. The most valuable thing in this life is not what you leave in material inheritance, but the example of strength and dignity that you show until your last breath. And I, Susan Miller, at 70 years old, chose to show that a woman is never too old to fight for her freedom, that it is never too late to say enough is enough, that true love never asks you to sacrifice your dignity, and that, sometimes, the greatest show of self-love is walking away from those who would harm you, no matter how much blood you share with them. That is my story. That is my truth. And if it helps, even one woman, to recognize abuse and defend herself, then every difficult moment will have been worth it.